The accounts you are about to hear were officially denied by authorities.
I never thought the desert could feel crowded, but that was the first thing that struck me that night near Black Rock Ridge in northern Nevada. The silence was so clean it hurt, like the ringing in your ears after a distant explosion. I was alone, or so I thought, with my truck parked beside an old mining road no one has used since the 70s. I'd gone out to clear my head, to drive aimlessly, to sleep under a sky that doesn't judge you. Nothing mystical, nothing strange. That's what I believed. My name is Thomas Calder, and I grew up hearing stories about the desert. Strange lights, bases that don't exist on maps, people who go in and never come back. I always assumed they were tales meant to scare tourists or excuse drunken nights. That night, however, something changed. I was sitting on the hood, smoking, watching the Milky Way split the sky in two, when I noticed a glow on the low hills to the west. It wasn't a headlight or a drone. It was human. Human silhouettes, walking. At first, I thought they were hikers with powerful flashlights, but there were no trails. And the strangest thing, there was no sound. No footsteps on gravel, no wind dragging sand, no voices. Just those figures, 5 or 6 of them, moving with a calm that set my nerves on edge. They glowed from within, as if their skin emitted a soft but defined bluish-white light. They didn't blink. They cast no shadows. I climbed down from the hood without realizing it. My cigarette fell to the ground and I didn't even put it out. I took a few steps toward them, as if hypnotized. That's when I noticed something that froze my blood. The sand was untouched. Not a single footprint. Nothing. As if they were floating millimeters above the ground, or as if the ground didn't recognize them. "Hello?" I said, and my voice sounded out of place, too human. The figures stopped at the same time. They didn't turn their heads, didn't look at me directly, but their attention settled on me like a weight. I felt pressure in my chest, a dry, ancient anxiety. I suddenly remembered my father, Louis Calder, telling me before he died that the desert watches, that not everything that walks there is alive in the same way we are. In that moment, I wanted to bolt, jump into the truck and disappear, but my legs wouldn't respond. One of the figures stepped forward. Its shape was clearly masculine, tall, thin, with long arms. It had no visible features, but I knew it was smiling. Not because I saw it, but because I felt it. A smile not meant to please, but to mark territory. Then, something even worse happened. I heard my name, not as sound, but inside my head. Tomas. Clear, clean, like the voice of someone who has known you forever. My hands started to shake. I thought of my ex-wife, Marina, of how she once told me I always seemed to be listening to something that wasn't there. I wondered if she'd been right. The figures resumed their walk, circling me at a distance. They didn't come close, but they didn't leave either. They moved among the hills as if patrolling, as if I were an anomaly in their landscape. Then I understood why people disappear in places like this. Not because something attacks them, but because something decides they no longer belong. I ran. I don't know how, but I ran. I lunged for the truck, stumbling, swallowing sand. I felt something following me. Not fast, not aggressive, just constant, like a tide. I started the engine in a panic and accelerated without looking back. In the rearview mirror, I saw the hills lit by those silhouettes, now motionless, watching. Watchers. I drove until dawn. I didn't stop. When I finally pulled into a gas station near Gerlach, the clerk looked at me strangely. He said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I didn't answer. There was no sand on my boots. They were clean. too clean. Since that night, I don't sleep well. Sometimes in the darkness of my apartment in Reno, I see that same glow filtering through the curtains. They don't move. They make no sound. They just watch. And I know, with a certainty I can't explain, that the light watchers didn't follow me to hurt me. They followed me because they already know who I am. And because, somehow, now, I'm watching them too. I never liked working nights along the southern edge of New Mexico, but the Los Alamos Secos Ranch near Hachita paid well and didn't ask questions. My name is Raul Mendoza, and back then I was the guy they called when something killed livestock and no one wanted to admit it out loud. Coyotes, they said. Wild dogs. Always the same story. But the bodies I found that first week didn't look like the work of anything known. Goats without a drop of blood, skin intact, 2 clean punctures beneath the jaw, as if someone had used a surgical tool with teeth. The border there isn't a line, it's a feeling. Parched land, low scrub, rusted posts, and a silence that puts strange ideas in your head. Nights smell like hot dust and old rust. I walked with a flashlight hanging from my neck and a rifle resting on my shoulder, listening to my own footsteps as if they belonged to someone else. The ranch owner, Don Emilio Vargas, had told me something small was prowling the pens. A short thing, he described it, like a bad child that learned to crawl again. The first time I saw it, I didn't understand what I was looking at. It was crouched beside a dry trough, barely taller than a goat, with an arched back and dark, almost greenish skin, stretched tight like wet leather. It had no hair. The head was large for the body, and the eyes looked like dirty glass, reflecting the light without fully returning it. I froze, my heart pounding in my throat. The thing lifted its head and sniffed the air. It smelled me. It made no sound. That was the worst part. It leapt backward with a speed that didn't match its size and vanished into the brush. When I moved closer, the ground was marked by thin, deep claw prints, spaced in a strange way, as if it walked at 2 different rhythms. The next day, Don Emilio found another dead goat. Same signature. 2 punctures. No blood. He started praying louder. Things became personal when Lucia, my younger sister, came to visit. She was always the brave one in the family, the one who laughed at strange stories. That night, I left her alone for a moment to check the perimeter. When I came back, I found her pale, sitting on the porch, staring into the desert as if something had spoken to her. She told me she'd seen a lizard standing like a person, watching her from the fence. Short, still, smiling without lips. I didn't sleep that dawn. I sat with the rifle loaded, staring at the black line of the horizon. Around 3, I heard a dry cracking sound, like bones breaking slowly. I followed it to the corral. There it was again. The chupacabras, though the name fell short. Its hands were smeared with something dark and thick. When it saw me, it didn't flee. It walked towards me, swaying, with a confidence that wasn't animal. I saw the teeth, small, sharp, too many. I fired. I swear I fired. The shot kicked up dust beside it, but the creature didn't even flinch. It took one more step closer, and then I understood it wasn't hunting out of hunger. It was learning, observing. It tilted its head as if listening to something I couldn't hear, and vanished into the night with an impossible leap. The next morning, Don Emilio told me things like that had happened in the 90s, that his father used to talk about the border predator, something that comes and goes when the land gets too hot and the border grows thin. I laughed out of politeness, but I started packing. I didn't leave that same night because Lucia insisted on staying until dawn. It was a mistake. The scream woke her. It wasn't human, but it wasn't animal either. I ran out and saw the small shadow moving fast among the pens. I followed the marks to the fence. On the other side, the desert seemed to breathe. I swore I saw two low-set eyes staring at me from nothingness. I didn't cross. Something told me that if I did, I wouldn't come back the same. We left at sunrise. Since then, every time I pass through New Mexico, I avoid the back roads. Sometimes along the roadside, I see something low crawling through the scrub, watching the cars go by. It doesn't attack. It doesn't chase. It just learns. And I know deep down that the borderland predator doesn't belong to one country or the other. It belongs to the space in between. And that space is widening. The road has no official name, only a nickname that no one says out loud if they live near Uinta County in northeastern Utah. I knew it as Skinwalker Road, a strip of old asphalt winding through scrub brush, low hills, and stretches of land where cell service dies without warning. My name is Ethan Rowe, and that night I learned that some roads don't connect places, but states of mind, and that some don't let you leave so easily. I was driving late, heading back from Vernal after helping a friend, Mark Jensen, close up his shop. The sky was clear, the moon low, and the desert smelled of cold earth and sage. Nothing out of the ordinary. I put the music on low, just enough to stay awake, and took the detour because it saved me 20 minutes. A classic mistake. As soon as I turned onto that road, I felt a strange pressure in my stomach, like when you know you forgot something important but can't remember what. A few minutes later, I saw something running parallel to the car. I thought it was a deer or a large coyote, but it moved wrong. Too upright for an animal, too fast for a human. I sped up. In the mirror, a blurred silhouette stared back at me, changing shape as if it couldn't decide what to be. I told myself I was tired, that the brain plays tricks at night. Then I heard the impact. Something landed on the roof of the car, light but solid, like a badly balanced body. I slammed on the brakes. Silence fell again, heavy. I got out with the flashlight in hand, my heart pounding. There was nothing there. No clear tracks, just confused marks in the dust, like footprints that started human and ended in claws. I got back in the car, swearing I wouldn't stop again. I drove a few more miles when I saw a woman walking along the roadside. Long hair, light-colored clothes. I slowed down on instinct. No one walks out there at night. I rolled down the window and asked if she needed help. She lifted her head, and her face didn't fit. The eyes were too far apart. The mouth moved with a strange delay. She said my name, Ethan, not with her voice, but as if she were thinking it out loud. I drove off without answering. That's when the chase began. I knew because the sound changed. Footsteps, many of them, around the car, sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes on 4. In the mirror, I saw shapes alternate, a huge dog, a naked man, something hunched with long arms. Every time I looked directly at them, they changed. They didn't attack the car. They played. They wanted me to keep going. I remembered my grandfather, Harold, who lived near a reservation and always said you shouldn't whistle at night or follow voices in the desert. Not everything that calls you wants to be found, he used to say. In that moment, I understood that Skinwalker Road wasn't a road. It was a threshold, and I was in the middle of it. The engine began to fail. The dashboard flickered. I felt blows on the doors, nails scraping along the paint. One of them stepped in front of the car, forcing me to brake. It was me, or something using my shape. Same face, same jacket. It smiled wrong, with too many teeth. It slapped the hood and leaned down to look me in the eyes. I felt a rush of memories that weren't mine. Running barefoot, smelling blood, laughing in the dark. I closed my eyes and hit the accelerator. The car passed through it like smoke. Suddenly, everything stopped. The road ended abruptly at a familiar intersection. Farm lights glowed in the distance. The engine came back to life. I looked behind me. Nothing. Just asphalt and silence. I didn't talk about it with anyone for weeks. When I finally told Mark, he said I wasn't the first, that the road tests you, that if it recognizes you, it never fully lets you go. Since then, I sometimes dream of running through the desert, changing shape, chasing red lights in the distance. I wake up with dirt under my fingernails. I haven't driven at night in Utah again, but I know Skinwalker Road is still there, waiting for someone else to take the shortcut. And I know, with a certainty I can't shake, that a part of me never fully left that road. You're listening to Lurking Moon. If these stories stay with you, please like and subscribe.
I'm Helen Moore, and if there's one thing I learned growing up along the North Shore of Minnesota, it's that winter does not forgive distraction. Lake Superior is not just water, it's a living body that breathes cold, that groans, that consumes people when they let their guard down. That was my mother's constant warning, and the reason I returned to Grand Marais after so many years. I didn't come back out of nostalgia. I came back because someone was disappearing in the forest, and I needed to know why. I worked as a winter guide, the kind who takes hikers on snowshoes along trails that seem harmless until you turn around and no longer know where you came from. The first disappearance was Noah Peterson, a local fisherman who knew the ice better than anyone. He went out on a clear morning and never returned. They found his sled intact, the fishing rod propped up as if he'd set it down to step away for a moment. Tracks leading into the woods. No tracks coming back. People began to whisper. The elders used the word no one wants to say when the snow becomes too silent. Wendigo. I didn't believe in that, or I didn't want to. I thought about hypothermia, human error, bad luck. Until I started hearing things at night. Voices. My name carried by the wind, exactly the way my sister Maria used to say it when we were girls. The second disappearance was worse. Clara Healy, a tourist from Wisconsin, went for a walk near the Cadunce Trail. They never found her, only her knit cap hanging from a high branch, too high for someone of her height. That's when the cold stopped feeling normal. It wasn't a cold that just bit your skin. It scrubbed your thoughts clean, hollowed you out. I decided to go out alone one night, with a flashlight, a radio, and more arrogance than I like to admit. The lake was covered in a low fog that slid along like heavy smoke. I walked along the edge of the forest, listening to the crunch of my own boots, until I heard it, footsteps that weren't mine. Slow, measured, too long. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I took a deep breath. Something breathed with me. I saw it among the trees, outlined against the snow. Tall, too tall, thin, as if its skin were stretched too tight. Its arms hung longer than they should, and its head was tilted, as if listening to a sound I couldn't hear. It had no visible eyes, but I knew it was looking at me. It smelled of old meat and broken pine. I tried to back away, but a voice pinned me in place. "Elena," it said, in Maria's voice. My sister had died 10 years earlier in an accident in Duluth. The Wendigo took a step forward, and I felt hunger. Not mine. Chuja. A hunger that never ends, that feeds on winter and solitude. Then I understood. It didn't hunt bodies. It hunted memories. I ran. I ran like I hadn't run since childhood, when my mother would shout for us to come inside before dark. The forest closed in around me, branches striking my face, distant laughter mixed with the wind. I heard footsteps behind me, sometimes on two legs, sometimes dragging. I heard my mother, my sister, even myself, begging me to stop. I stumbled near the edge of the lake and fell onto the ice. The Wendigo appeared in front of me, enormous, almost beautiful in its horror. It leaned down, and for a second I saw something human in its shape, as if beneath all of it there remained a trace of someone lost long ago. It opened its mouth, and I saw teeth that never ended. The hunger struck my chest like a blow. I don't know what saved me. Maybe the radio, which began to scream with static. Maybe the lake itself, which groaned with a deep, ancient sound. The Wendigo straightened suddenly, as if something had called it from deeper in the woods. It left me there, shaking, as it vanished among the trees, taking the voices with it. The next morning, they found human remains near the trail. Not complete. Never complete. The police closed the case as prolonged exposure. I quit my job that same week. I moved farther south, away from the lake. But winter follows me. Sometimes when the house is silent, I hear long footsteps in snow that isn't there. And I know the Wendigo of Lake Superior didn't leave. It's just waiting for someone to hear their name carried on the wind.
My name is Xavier Rousseau, and I never thought I'd hear Caribbean stories in the northern bayou of Louisiana. Around here, people talk about alligators, storms that arrive without warning, and neighbors who don't ask questions. But when I moved to Bayou Chenoir, a small, isolated community north of Lake Maurepas, I learned that myths travel with people, and sometimes they adapt in order to survive. I came for work, a freelance electrician fixing old lines and houses slowly sinking into the swamp. The place felt frozen in time, raised wooden homes, torn screens, dirt roads that turn into thick mud when it rains. My neighbor, Miss Althea, an older woman with an unfamiliar accent, warned me on my first night not to go out after dark. "The night moves here," she said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. At first, I thought she was exaggerating, until I started noticing things. Skinny animals drained of blood found near homes, chickens dead without visible wounds, dogs that refused to go outside at night and whimpered while staring at the sky. And above all, a strange smell in the air after midnight, something between burnt meat and hot metal. One night, while working late repairing a generator, I saw a light moving over the swamp. It wasn't a will-o-wisp. It was faster, more purposeful. It flew low, zigzagging between the cypress trees. I thought it was a drone until the light stopped and dropped straight down behind an old house, right where Clement Baptiste lived, a quiet man no one ever visited. The next day, I asked about him. No one wanted to talk. Only Miss Althea held my gaze for a long moment and said a word that didn't fit the map. Sucolian. She explained, in a low voice, almost ashamed, that her grandmother had come from Trinidad and brought the story with her. A witch who removes her skin at night, turns into a ball of fire, and drains the life from people as they sleep. "She doesn't fly the same way here," she said. "Here, she learns." That same week, I began having strange dreams. I felt pressure on my chest, as if someone were sitting on me. I dreamed of a skinless figure, red and shining, crawling along the ceiling. I woke up sweating, with purple marks on my arms. I blamed stress. mosquitoes, anything except what I knew deep down was happening. The night everything broke, I heard footsteps outside my house. Not heavy, not fast, barefoot. I looked out the window and saw a human figure walking towards the swamp. It was Clement. But something was wrong. His back looked sunken, and his skin hung loose like badly worn clothing. Against every instinct, I followed him. He reached a long abandoned shack, and there I saw him do something that still turns my stomach. He knelt and began to remove his skin, literally, as if unfastening a human coat. Beneath it were no normal muscles, but something red, shining, pulsing. When he finished, the skin lay folded on a rock. The rest of him rose, ignited, transformed into a ball of fire that shot off towards the houses. I stood frozen. I don't know how much time passed. When I came to, I heard a scream in the distance. I ran without thinking to Renee's house, a single mother who lived at the water's edge. I found her on the floor, unconscious, pale as wax. On her neck, 2 small dark marks. The burning light vanished into the sky, returning towards the swamp. At dawn, Clement was back at his house. Normal. Too normal. He walked as if nothing had happened. When I confronted him, he smiled wearily. He told me the bayou has its own hunger, that here the myth adapts because winter doesn't kill like it does in the Caribbean. Here, it's the humidity, the loneliness, the forgetting. He told me that if I destroyed his skin, he would die, but something worse would take his place. I didn't do it. I left. I abandoned the job, the house, everything. Renee survived, but she was never the same. They say she now sleeps with salt under her bed and garlic hanging in the windows, mixing traditions as if that were enough. Sometimes when I pass near Louisiana, I smell something burning at night. And I remember that myths don't disappear when they cross borders. They change. They learn. And in Bayou Chien Noir, the Sukoyan no longer needs wings. She only needs neighbors who don't look too closely.
My name is Lucy Harris, and when people think of the San Luis Valley in southern Colorado, they imagine open skies, distant mountains, and that dry silence that seems to clear your head. No one imagines small noises inside the walls, tiny footsteps in the barn, or muffled laughter beneath the floorboards. I didn't imagine it either until I returned to my family's ranch after my grandfather Esteban died. The ranch sits near San Acacio, surrounded by flat fields and old irrigation ditches no one cleans anymore. I grew up there, but I left young, tired of the isolation. I came back out of obligation to settle paperwork and sell the property. My mother told me over the phone to be careful with the valley's things. I didn't ask what she meant. In this family, people always spoke in code when something frightened them. I slept poorly the first night, not from nostalgia, but from sounds. Soft tapping, like fingernails touching wood from inside the walls. I thought of mice until I heard something that didn't fit. Quick, light footsteps, too rhythmic. I got up with a flashlight and checked the house. Nothing. But in the kitchen, I found a chair moved and an apple with a bite taken out of it. Small teeth, almost childlike. The next day, I went to the barn. The place was disturbed. Tools moved, ropes untied, grain scattered as if someone had played with it. My neighbor, Bill Greenwood, saw me come out looking shaken and just shook his head. "Don't provoke them," he said. "They've always been here." When I asked what he meant, he lowered his voice and said a word I didn't expect to hear in Colorado: gnomes. He told me that for generations, people had seen small figures slipping into barns, entering houses at night, that they weren't evil, but they weren't good either.
If they notice you're alone, they get confused, he said. They think they can stay. I laughed nervously, but that night I left a glass of milk on the table without knowing why. My grandmother used to do that when I was a child, a memory I had buried. The dreams began soon after. I dreamed of small hands pulling my hair, of shrill voices whispering my name from dark corners. I woke with faint bruises on my legs, like pinches. One dawn, I felt something sit on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped slightly. I heard quick, curious breathing. I pretended to sleep. I didn't move. Something laughed softly. The night I saw them, there was no moon. I went out to the porch because the noises in the barn were impossible to ignore. I carried a flashlight and my grandfather's old shotgun, more for comfort than anything else. When I opened the barn door, I saw them moving in the shadows, figures no taller than a meter, skin dark like damp earth, large eyes that glimmed in the reflected light. They wore clothes made of scraps, and some had small, crooked hats. They didn't run. They watched me. One of them stepped forward and clicked its tongue, as if evaluating something. I felt a rush of memories that weren't mine, my childhood, my solitary games in the fields, the times my mother said I talked to invisible friends. I understood, with a slow, creeping chill, that I had never been as alone as I believed. "You came back," said a thin voice, not with words, but directly inside my head. I stepped back and stumbled. The gnomes moved a little closer, curious, not aggressive. Behind them, I saw a part of the barn wall I didn't remember, a low opening that seemed to lead underground. It smelled of dampness and roots. I realized the ranch wasn't just a house, it was a doorway. I ran. I shut the barn and barricaded myself inside the house. That night I heard them everywhere, on the roof, beneath the floor, scratching at the walls. They didn't try to force their way in, they waited. At dawn, I found the milk gone and a line of tiny footprints around the glass. I searched through my grandfather's belongings and found an old notebook. It spoke of pacts, of respecting boundaries, of not selling the land because they are bound to the valley. It said that if someone left for too long, the gnomes grew restless, that returning confused them. I didn't sell the ranch. I didn't leave entirely either. I spend seasons there, keeping the place alive. I leave offerings. I don't look directly at the small shadows when they move through the fields. Sometimes, at nightfall, I see them entering the barn as they always have, and I know that as long as I respect the valley, the gnomes will let me stay. But I also know that if I try to leave again, they won't be so patient.
My name is Clara Barr, and I always thought the redwood forests of Northern California were sacred in a tourist sense, not a literal one. Ancient giants, damp air, marked trails, rangers with radios, and tourists taking photos in enforced silence. That was all, until I accepted a temporary contract in the protected area near Redwood Creek, a few hours from Eureka, and learned that there are places where the word protected doesn't mean what we think it does. My job was simple: nighttime wildlife inventory, checking sensors, making sure no one entered after hours. Long walks, headlamp, notebook, cold coffee. I liked the solitude. The forest sounds different at night, as if it breathes more slowly. Redwoods don't creak like other trees. Their sounds are deep, almost internal. The first week was normal, except for a persistent sensation of being watched from very low down, at the level of the roots. I saw the first light on Thursday night. I thought it was an out-of-season firefly or a sensor malfunction reflecting oddly. It hovered between two enormous trunks, no more than a meter above the ground, small, greenish, pulsing. When I aimed my flashlight at it, the light went out.
In its place, I heard a brief, high laugh, like someone covering their mouth at the last second. I didn't report it. Mistake number 1. The following nights, the lights multiplied. Not always the same. Some blue, others golden, others white, like soft embers. They moved quickly, appeared and disappeared, always among the roots, never in open ground. I began to notice tiny footprints in damp soil, marks that didn't match any local animal, too small, too orderly. One dawn I heard voices, not clear words, but interwoven murmurs, as if someone were speaking from behind water. I stopped near a clearing not marked on any map, a natural circle surrounded by redwoods older than the park itself. That was where the lights gathered, and that was where I saw them. Small figures, no taller than my forearm, with slender bodies and human proportions, but wrong. Luminous skin, almost translucent, thin wings, not insect-like, but like dried leaves reinforced with shining veins. They didn't look fragile, they looked attentive. They watched me without hiding, tilting their heads, evaluating. I felt a sudden pressure in my ears, like a change in altitude. And then I understood, without hearing words, I had entered a court. Not just a physical place, but an agreement, an organized presence, something ancient and hierarchical. Something that didn't need my permission to exist, but did require my consent to proceed. I took a step back. The forest responded, literally. Roots lifted slightly from the ground, just enough to make me stumble. I fell to my knees. The fairies, because there was no other word that fit, floated closer, without touching me. One of them, larger, with a faint reddish glow, positioned itself in front of me. Its eyes were black, deep, without reflection. Then it spoke, not with sound, with memory. I saw my mother, Stacy, years earlier, reading me stories about forest creatures before bed. I saw my grandmother in Michoacan warning me not to accept gifts from things that shine. I felt shame, not fear, as if I had broken a rule I had always known but chosen to forget. "This path is not yours," said the voice inside my head. "But now you have seen us." The lights began to spin around me, forming slow ritual patterns. I understood they weren't deciding whether to harm me, they were deciding what to do with me. Part of me wanted to run. Another, deeper, felt strangely at home. The forest seemed to lean toward that spot, like a living amphitheater. I don't know how much time passed. When I blinked, I was alone, on my knees, covered in mud, with dawn filtering between the trunks. The clearing was gone. Where there had been a perfect circle, there were now just ordinary trees. Too ordinary. From that night on, the park changed for me. Trails that seemed to stretch longer, radios that failed only when I used them, tourists who said they felt guided off-trail by pretty lights, reports of people lost for hours who swore they'd heard small, friendly laughter too close for comfort. I returned to the clearing many times. I never found it, but they found me. Sometimes a solitary light followed me at a distance. Other times I found small arrangements of leaves and stones near my cabin. They never crossed an invisible boundary. They never entered. There was no need. I resigned months later. I said it was exhaustion. No one argued. I now live farther south, away from dense forests. But when I see tall trees, I feel that pressure in my ears. And some nights, when I turn off the light, I see a soft glimmer in the corner of the room. The hidden court of the redwoods does not punish. It observes. It waits. And when it recognizes you, it never lets you go completely.
My name is Daniel Mercer, and for years I thought Bluff Creek was just another damp, forgotten corner of Northern California. A place for old loggers, stubborn hunters, and people like me, those who prefer the forest to the noise of the city. I ended up there for work, helping Rick Holloway, a family friend, survey some land near the creek. Nothing glamorous, nothing mysterious. That's what I believed before I saw the footprints. The first morning was cold and heavy, fog clinging to the ground as if it refused to lift. We were walking along the creek bed when Rick stopped short. He pointed at the mud. There they were. Enormous tracks, deep, clearly humanoid in shape. Not a bear, not a prank. 5 distinct toes, a wide heel, nearly half a meter long. Rick didn't say anything. He just spat on the ground and kept walking, as if ignoring them were an unspoken rule. "Not a good idea to stay long," he muttered later. "This place gets strange after dark." We camped anyway that night. I'd always been a skeptic, even after growing up hearing my father's stories about the hairy giant that roamed the woods when he was young. Drunk tales, I thought. Campfire, black coffee, nervous laughter. Until the sounds changed. The forest stopped sounding normal. No crickets, no birds, just a heavy silence and something moving far off, breaking branches with deliberate slowness. Then we heard a scream. Not animal, not human, something in between. Deep, resonant, as if it came from the chest of something far too large. Rick went pale. I grabbed the flashlight and aimed it at the trees. Nothing. But the scream came again, closer. I felt the sound in my stomach, like an internal blow. In that moment, I understood that some things don't want to be seen, but they don't want to stay hidden either. The early morning hours were worse. Footsteps around the camp, heavy, slow. Each step made the damp ground tremble. It wasn't running, it wasn't stalking, it was walking, as if it knew we had nowhere to go. When I finally found the courage to peek out of the tent, I saw it. It was enormous, taller than any man I'd ever known, covered in dark, matted hair, with reddish highlights under the moonlight. Its arms hung almost to his knees. The head seemed sunk between its shoulders, with no visible neck. Its eyes were small, deep, intelligent. They looked at me without surprise, as if I were the animal out of place. It didn't scream. It didn't come closer. It simply tilted its head, assessing me. It smelled of dampness, old wood, something wild and ancient. I felt fear, yes, but also a strange shame, as if I had interrupted it in its own world. Rick whispered my name from inside the tent. The giant turned its head slightly toward the sound. It took one step. The ground vibrated. I thought it was going to attack us. Instead, it struck a nearby log with the back of its hand. The impact was brutal, a warning. The message was clear: don't continue. It vanished into the trees with an ease that felt insulting for its size. The forest took several minutes to recover its normal sounds. No one slept after that. At dawn, we found footprints circling the camp, marked with precision. It could have entered. It had chosen not to. Rick left that same day. I stayed a little longer, driven by something I still can't explain. It was a mistake. 2 days later, while following the creek alone, I felt that same pressure in the air. I heard branches breaking uphill. The giant appeared again, this time in full daylight. I saw old scars on his torso, patches where the hair was missing. I saw weariness in his posture. It wasn't a monster. It was a resident. It raised one enormous hand and pointed toward the deep forest, then toward me, and finally toward the road out. It didn't speak, but I understood. Bluff Creek wasn't a place to explore. It was a boundary, and I had crossed it. When I returned to town and told what had happened, no one laughed. Some people looked away. Others nodded silently. An older man told me his grandfather used to speak of the hairy guardian who appeared when people pushed too far. He said, "It doesn't kill, it remembers." I left Bluff Creek shortly after, but sometimes, in my dreams, I'm back there, walking through the mud, following tracks I know I shouldn't follow. And always, just before I wake up, I feel that heavy gaze from among the trees. The hairy giant of Bluff Creek doesn't need proof. It doesn't need cameras. It only needs you to know it exists and to remember that the forest is not yours.
My name is Glenda Schreiber, and if there's one thing I learned growing up in West Texas, it's that the desert always collects what it's owed. It doesn't matter if you're a rancher, a drifter, or just passing through. I inherited La Esperanza Ranch near Marfa when my father died of a sudden heart attack, the kind that gives no warning. I came back thinking the hardest part would be dealing with old fences, drought, and overdue bills. I wasn't prepared to find livestock hollowed out from the inside. The first attack was a goat. I found it at dawn, stiff, eyes open, with a pair of clean marks on its neck. There was no blood. None. Not on the ground, not on the fur. As if someone had opened an invisible valve and let it drain completely dry. I called the county veterinarian, Hank Wilson, and he gave me the usual explanations: coyotes, wild dogs, heat stress. He didn't look me in the eye when he spoke. The attacks continued. 2 calves, a sheep. Always the same. Total drainage, precise marks, no mess. The desert around the ranch began to feel attentive. Nights grew quieter, as if the insects knew when to fall silent. The dogs wouldn't leave the porch after sunset. They whimpered at the darkness, tails tucked tight. One afternoon, I went to see Mrs. Tanner, an old neighbor who lives beyond Highway 67. She used to watch me as a child, back when my mother was still alive. She listened in silence, and then said a word I hadn't heard since the 90s, chupacabras. She crossed herself without realizing it. She told me that in hard years something similar had happened, that it wasn't animal or man, that it came when the land was dry and people were tired. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my father's shotgun and a powerful flashlight, watching the corral. Around 3 in the morning, I caught a strange smell, metallic, mixed with hot dust. Then I saw it moving among the low brush. It wasn't large, short, compact, with an arched back. It walked on 2 legs and sometimes on 4. Its skin was grayish, taut, with something like short spines running along its spine. The chupacabra stopped beside a cow as if it knew her. The cow didn't move, didn't low. She was alive, but absent, as if something had switched off her instincts. A dry cold climbed my spine. I aimed. The creature lifted its head and looked at me. Its eyes were large, dark, far too aware. I didn't see rage. I saw calculation. I fired. The shot kicked up dirt beside it. The thing didn't even flinch. It made an impossible leap and landed beyond the fence without a sound. When I ran to the cow, she was already dead. Empty, like the others. The next morning, I found tracks around the ranch. They didn't match anything I knew. Narrow prints with long toes appearing and disappearing in the sand as if the creature chose when to leave a trace. I called the sheriff, Raymond Cole, who took photos and told me not to worry. The press exaggerates everything, he said. But that night he left a patrol car parked nearby. He didn't come back. The attacks moved closer to the house. Chickens. My father's old dog, Sombra, was found lifeless behind the shed. I cried harder than I had since the funeral. I swore I wouldn't let it continue. I set traps, lights, cameras. Nothing worked. The chupacabras seemed to know everything before I did. The last night I saw it again, closer than ever. It stood on the barn roof, outlined against the moon. I saw scars on its body, hardened patches as if it had survived attempts to kill it. It emitted a low, vibrating sound that I felt in my bones. And then I understood something terrible. It wasn't hunting out of need. It was marking territory. I remembered my father telling me when I was a girl that the land never truly belonged to us, that you only look after the land for as long as you can. The chupacabras climbed down from the roof and walked towards me. It stopped a few meters away, lowered its head as if sniffing my fear, my exhaustion. Then it turned and disappeared into the desert. There were no more attacks after that night. I sold part of the herd, closed the old corral, changed routines. But sometimes, when the wind blows from the west, I smell that hot metal in the air. And I know the desert blood feeder is still out there. It didn't leave. It just decided that for now, it had taken enough.
My name is Samuel Green, and I grew up hearing stories about the Brown Mountain Lights in the hills west of Morganton, North Carolina. Everyone around here has a version: ghost lanterns, swamp gas, strange reflections. The usual explanations. I left young to work in telecommunications and came back years later to care for my sick mother. I thought the worst thing waiting for me would be the long silence of the nights and the weight of returning to a place that never fully lets you go. The first time I saw the lights was from the porch. They weren't erratic points or vague flashes. They were figures. Tall, slender, with human proportions, made of a soft, whitish light, as if someone had drawn people with dimmed neon. They walked along the opposite slope, slowly, without touching the ground. My mother, Helen, was with me. She wasn't surprised. She just squeezed my hand. "They've seen you," she said. "Now they won't leave you alone." I thought she was delirious. The Alzheimer's was getting worse. But the lights stopped at the same time, and they turned. I felt something like shame, the way you do when you're caught looking where you shouldn't. The lights flickered once, twice, and went out. I started asking questions. I spoke with Roy McDowell, a retired park ranger who had patrolled those trails for decades. He told me the lights weren't new, that they had changed over the years. They used to just float. Now they watched. "They're intelligent," he said, without irony, "and they like it when someone recognizes them." The following nights, the lights returned, not always in the same place, sometimes near the old overlook, other times lower down, among the trees. Once, one figure came so close it illuminated the trunk of an old oak. The bark looked transparent under its glow. I felt a low hum in my ears, like static. I thought about recording them, but every time I pulled out my phone, the light drifted away, almost annoyed. One night, I whistled without realizing it, a nervous habit. The response was immediate. 3 figures appeared where there had been nothing before. They moved closer, forming a semicircle. The hum intensified, and I felt a pull in my chest, as if something were trying to synchronize with me. I saw memories I didn't expect. My childhood, running along those same trails. My father, Walter, telling me not to follow the mountain lights. My mother, when she was young, laughing. "They're not children," I whispered, without knowing why. One of the figures tilted its head. The gesture was too human. The light pulsed, and I understood something, without words. They had been children, or something like it. People who once walked there in another time, with other names. The mountain didn't let them go. It rewrote them. The next morning, my mother woke lucid for the first time in months. She asked if I had heard them speaking from the inside, too. She told me that as a child, she saw them as playful lights, but over the years, they started asking for attention. If you ignore them, they come closer. If you follow them, you stay. I decided to go up alone on the old trail, the one no one uses anymore. The lights were waiting for me. They didn't appear all at once. They turned on one by one, as if someone were adjusting an ancient switch. I walked toward them. They didn't flee. They opened up, marking an impossible path between rocks and roots. I felt time stretch. The forest breathed with me. In a clearing I didn't remember, the figures gathered. I saw more defined shapes, hands, faces without features, silhouettes of children and adults mixed together. The hum turned into a murmur that didn't come from the air, but from my head. They showed me scenes, people lost on the mountain, searchers who never returned, families waiting. There was no violence, just absorption, as if the mountain took those who spent too long staring. One figure separated from the group. It was smaller, brighter. I felt a strong pull, a clear invitation. One more step, and something in me would have stayed there forever. I remembered my mother's hand gripping me. I remembered her tired voice. "No," I said out loud. The lights went out all at once. The hum stopped. I found myself alone in the forest, sweating, my flashlight shaking in my hand. It took me hours to get back home. Since that night, the lights still appear, but they don't come as close. They watch me from a distance, as if measuring my attention. My mother declined soon after. Before losing herself completely, she told me that Brown Mountain is always raising something. Not bodies, consciousnesses. Now I live with that certainty. Sometimes, from the porch, I see a luminous figure that looks too much like me. It doesn't call out. It just waits. And I know that the day I grow tired of resisting, the luminous children of Brown Mountain will make room for me among them.